This is the last questing area of the new expansion to Final Fantasy XIV, a modern MMO that has received massive and well-deserved critical acclaim. There is a staggering amount of things this expansion has done that has garnered such praise, and I'm going to get into some of them, but I wanted to start here, and I wanted you all to listen to this track. This track is titled Full Fathom 5, which is a phrase from William Shakespeare's The Tempest being the name of this area as well. I will explain how you got here, but I want to point out that at the launch of this expansion, there are 3 tracks with a similar tune, Full Fathom 5, Neath Dark Waters, and Mortal Instance, creating a sort of leitmotif out of the melody. A leitmotif is simply any short musical theme that's repeated several times in the book of a larger piece of music, connected to a person, place, or situation, and in this context, these 3 songs, all of which carry the same theme to them, fit. So, there we go. This is all important to think about on some level, especially considering that Final Fantasy as a series is full of leitmotifs. The Crystal Prelude is a famous one. There are variations on the title theme across several installments in the series. The Victory Jingle is a perfectly short, simple, and memorable little thing. You know, it's a timeless jingle that shows up in almost every title in the series. Look, I'm not really here to talk about all these. I want to talk about this one leitmotif and the sheer beauty and care and passion that was put into it. And also that it's completely fucking bonkers, and I don't know what it's doing here. Okay. So Final Fantasy XIV is, as I said, a modern MMO, or massively multiplayer online RPG game. RPG game. Ha ha ha. And it's one that I would qualify as a more traditionally styled one. So there are many MMOs out there that are trying to break out of the format that was largely popularized by World of Warcraft by adding new creative elements, different ways of thinking about how a community of people engage with each other in a shared space, whatever the fuck EVE Online is trying to do. However, FF14 is not that. It is an extremely traditional MMO in the sense that you go questing for gear, money, and experience, and the more of those you gain, the bigger and bigger dungeons and raids you unlock, looping over and over until you get to the top, where you presumably spend your days doing daily and weekly quests, dungeons, and raids, amass a pile of gear, so on and so forth until the property dies. In this way, it is extremely like the retail version of World of Warcraft, but it is also extremely different as someone who's spent a lot of time in both. FF14 benefits greatly from the years of wild, unbalanced stumbling WoW did in the medium, in addition to Final Fantasy XI, the first MMO of the series before it. It has also benefited from a different Final Fantasy game known as Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, an MMO that was so profoundly bad that the game had to shut down. But actually, how it shut down was honestly really fascinating. Okay, so instead of just closing the servers, the game had a diegetic ending. Bahamut was summoned, and the calamity was unleashed upon the world, destroying it. However, the land survived, people slowly recovered, and the world began to put itself back together in what we know as Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Learning from your mistakes and your past seems to be part of the thematic thread of the series. Once the ship righted itself by way of pretty significant commercial and critical success, the subsequent patches for the game established something of a pattern of how content is released, what new dungeons and raids were unlocked, all while giving everyone more of the overarching narrative. And this is actually one of the biggest and most significant departures from World of Warcraft that I really want to talk about, at least, for now, the main scenario quest line. See, WoW's progression is, I haven't touched Shadowlands, so I'm sorry, it was based entirely on your level. Once you hit level 60 or 58, you would gain access to the questing areas of the Burning Crusade. 68 unlocked Wrath of the Lich King, 80 Cataclysm, 85 Wrath of Pandaria, so on and so forth. That did change when they started to adjust character level, as I understand it, but I kind of stopped playing in Legion, and regardless of that level squish, there was no storyline that needed to be followed in order to unlock the newest expansion. Once you had the level requirements in, congrats, you're recruited into the new story bit. In sharp contrast, outside of buying story skips separately, you have to go through the entire main scenario quest in FF14 before moving on to the next, and while Okay, so yes, you can skip every cutscene and click through all the dialogue. No one is literally forcing you to engage with the story. But if we go at this in good faith and assume that you follow along with it, this line of mandatory questing tells an entire story from beginning to current patch. And this is a benefit to the game's cohesion. Not everyone plays an MMO for the story. But if you're looking to engage in the fiction of an MMO's world, a game structured like World of Warcraft is hostile because it doesn't care about the story. And that's obvious, right? Okay, there's a ton of lore to be dug up in WoW, tons and tons of lore. It has an insane amount of lore connecting back into older Warcraft games for sure, but none of that really has anything to do with what is largely what the game's designed to make you engage with, what the designers believe is the most important part of the game, the rating. As an aside, WoW Classic maybe kind of revealed that the thing that drew WoW to such widespread success was more the community aspect of it rather than just the mechanical elements of rating, something that slowly got leached out of it the less personal the game became in retail. Regardless, the way WoW is structured makes the introduction of each patch have to be able to lure in new players, ideally those that got a complimentary level skip into the game without ever needing to know anything about what's been going on in the world. In a way, I feel like the game tries to make the world feel like it's passing in real time, like important events, major character deaths, characters growing up, taking on new roles of leadership, are static across all levels of content, or actually kind of is. So if you go to Stormwind now, and by now I mean Battle for Azeroth now, not Shadowlands now. I still haven't played it, I'm sorry. But if you went to Stormwind to look at the king, at the time the king of Stormwind would be Anduin. Even though at the start of World of Warcraft, Anduin was wasn't he like a child? I can't remember. However, the game can't retcon everything that happens in the game's storyline to be constantly updating, so inevitably, after receiving important news from Anduin over and over, this hypothetical new player will start Legion, where Varian will suddenly be the king and die. Spoilers, by the way. Now, I can only predict that a lot of why WoW does these changes is in what the designers favor from patch to patch, namely mechanical fixes, balancing issues, and rating content. From a novice perspective, looking at how WoW has changed tells me a story of a game that receives complaints from many things and seeks a very expedient mechanical solution to problems that may not always need such a touch, leaving the writing staff to try to backfill all the new things in this purgatorial, anachronistic hellscape each new expansion continues to turn Azeroth into. So, a great example of this would be... No, I can't think of anything. I'm gonna cut. This was a huge diversion, all just to say that in contrast, the world of FF14 develops in step with your progression through it. Whether or not Ul'dah is friendly to you, or if you can talk to Moonbrita, depends entirely on where you are in it, and no amount of new patches can take that from you, leaving you in a situation where you and your friends and any random stranger you meet can all be in the same physical space, or digital space, but seeing it in radically different parts of its life. This is all to point to my major conundrum with the newest patch of Shadowbringers, a game that hinges its narrative heavily on the game that came before it, and that is no small investment. Shadowbringers is the most recent patch, following Stormblood, Heavensward, and A Realm Reborn before it. That is 3 entire MMO expansions worth of story, and consider that the average expansion takes about 2 years to get from launch to the final story patch. I'm gonna pivot back to WoW for a moment. I feel like I'm bullying it. I'm really sorry. I do like WoW, but I want to talk about the launch of Battle for Azeroth. At this point in time, I'd largely fallen off of WoW, and it was the generosity of a couple wonderful friends that got me briefly back into the game before the whole Hong Kong protest scandal. God, isn't time funny? That seems so long ago. I really hope the protesters are doing okay. Anyway, I went through the opening quest, and this is something I've seen before. This is the same kind of opening that happened with Pandaria, Warlords, Legion, a big, dramatic, exciting, instanced series of quests to lay down the groundwork, who the relevant figures are, the gist of the conflict, and it was here, storming through Lordaeron, where I watched my hunter vanish into the ether, so I can watch Anduin, Greymane, Jaina, and someone I didn't know have a talk with Sylvanas, where she blew up the entire city. The NPCs just barely escape with their lives, and I am also here, I guess. I definitely want to get more into just how many ways WoW storytelling is so underwhelming. But the point here is that this has happened to us before. These big cinematic info dumps that get us generally aware of the thing what needs to be doing, but with little to no connection to what happened before. And I know I've spent the past entirety of this video harping on that, but, God. Okay, look. World of Warcraft has around 3 major audiences by my limited estimation. So you have new players getting lured into playing the wildly popular online experience, lore-obsessed superfans of the series, and people who enjoy the communities they found and the challenges raiding in dungeons give them. And for pretty much all of them, a strong narrative doesn't really mean much. New players don't really need to care about what happened before the new content came out, because it would really fucking suck to tell your friend, hey, play all of Warcraft in order to understand what the hell is happening. And beyond that, it would likely be unprofitable if new players feel like they're fundamentally missing out by skipping ahead to the new stuff, and it would double, triple suck if your friends are already knee-deep in new content, and you're, behind by over 100 levels at time of Battle for Azeroth. This is an old script. You're just gonna have to work with me on this. Making the narrative this disconnected and simple helps the regular raiding crowds too, because these cutscenes are either entertaining enough to look at and get a sense of the world, or easy enough to skip and not feel utterly lost, while the superfans are getting shortchanged. They're super fans. Like, they're gonna tell me, should they ever find this video, who that 4th person is and why she's in fact very extremely cool and important, and cool, thank you. What is baffling to me, though, as someone whose only major experiences with MMOs prior were World of Warcraft and Ragnarok Online, is that FF14 doesn't really give that much leeway in its storytelling. The game kind of expects you to have been caught up, sort of. Like, the basic premise of Shadowbringers isn't really that obscure. It's pretty easy to kind of get it. You're introduced to a new world, the first, which is overrun with light. See, ether is kind of like magic energy in this world, and it's important to balance ether. Too much of any one of them will start to fuck up the world, and the first is loaded to the tits with light. To the point that night never falls, most of the world has been, like, incinerated in blinding light. These new monsters called Sin Eaters are going around infecting people with light, turning them into more Sin Eaters, and on until the world threatens to be lost utterly to the light. And that's bad for many reasons. It's bad for the first because everyone will die, but it's also bad for your world because when one of these little other worlds get overwhelmed with ether, they kind of snap back into your world, the source, killing millions of people, just like what happened to the world when the game designers rebooted the game. What is missing in all of this is the dynamics and relationships between you and the main cast, which I can't really speculate too much on how it feels to be introduced to these characters, extremely well by now for the first time, but it's what makes the story of Shadowbringers all the more resonant and interesting. See, in typical anime fashion, the story isn't one that's distinctly about you versus the main conflict, but a story that weaves in and out of the personal lives and struggles of the entire party. As we venture to purge light from this world, Alphinaud has to confront someone who believes himself to be the sole savior of the first, a conflict which means a lot to Alphinaud because back in A Realm Reborn, he sought to be the sole savior of Eorzea, which is another name for your world, by creating a unified militia, which then promptly betrayed him and nearly cost the lives of all of his closest friends and himself. They each have these interesting, nuanced intersections with what has happened to them, what they know of you and your shared past, and what is happening to them right now. And it kind of baffles me that this game cares so much at a time where it could easily just coast like WoW does. New players don't need a lot of lore to get going. The superfans are gonna superfan, and regular folks are already invested, but that's not what happened. So, we're getting closer to where we began, but I cannot overstate how much Shadowbringers brought to the table. Outside of some weird changes to combat, the story changed so much in an attempt to make this new world feel so starkly different. There actually was once a time where I was kind of wary about this new expansion because the way they were advertising it initially, it sounded incredibly simple. Like, the concept of what if light was bad isn't exactly a stunningly creative turn for a story, and it's also something that's been explored a lot in video games. There was like an entire era of games that explored the duality of light and darkness around the time of the Nintendo GameCube. So for this to happen in the year of our Lord 2019 felt dated, and a lot of initial teaser trailers didn't seem to imply much outside of mildly neat aesthetics. I thought it would be decent enough, but what we got instead was one of the tightest and most thoughtful stories I've seen coming out of Square Enix in general in an MMO expansion. The concept was taken to wild extremes to make the very concept of light extremely horrifying, and that design decision seeped into every element. Just as a small point, when the battle music in FF14 goes in all of the other expansions, they have a lot of similar theming, from AR to Heavensward to Stormblood, and Shadowbringers is just this. Okay, where the story has often put you firmly in the narrative position of the muscle of the team, where you don't really engage with the plot as directly as the rest of the main characters, you're kind of around to dish out the big ouchies when the rest of them get in over their heads. This is the first time the game lets you do 4-man content single player, with the other main characters filling in the party spots for you, and even more than that, the game hurts your character directly. Now, granted, this is a bit of a game of good faith, because ludonarrative dissonance will always kick in, and there will always be clever boys out there that will go, but you're the main character of an MMO. At the end of the story, you're gonna have to idle around Yulmore while running dailies and quietly wondering where your old raiding group went and why your free company doesn't seem to talk to you anymore. And you're right, but that's not important. Remember, we've been giving our hypothetical player here a lot of good faith, and if you've been watching all the cutscenes and you're invested in the story, then the story has, at the top of Mount Gulg, as you finish slaying innocents, told you that you are going to die, and not just die like any villain would tell you, but that you have failed. See, Emmett Selk, the best villain, I guess, has been helping you for a while at this point, trying to see if you're strong enough to do what needs to be done to save the first. See, the light is governed by these giant monsters called Light Wardens, and every time someone kills a Light Warden, that light is forcibly pushed into that person, turning them into the next Light Warden. It's sort of a Dragon Age Origins thing. You have been blessed by Hydaelyn, this giant crystal that made you into a Warrior of Light in the Source, so you've been going around voring all of this Light Warden light, no problem. Except that Y'shtola has pointed out that there is a problem, and the problem is that you're now full to the tits with light, and if you take too much in, it will kill you. So you've killed Philia, Titania, Eros, Storge, and now Innocence, and whoops, you've reached light capacity. Everyone believes that Emmett Selk has tricked you, but he instead is kind of let down, thinking that you are something greater than you are. He tells you that you will not simply die, but that this light will consume you, and you'll become the new Light Warden of the First, kill all your friends, bring about the calamity, and kill millions. He then takes the Crystal Exarch, a friend of yours, and also a character from your past that you know, but only if you've done certain optional content back in ARR, and dives down into the last refuge of darkness in the First, the Tempest. And when you get there... Before we take the plunge, I want to take a moment to talk about what an endgame area has looked like in the past. Now, AR had a complicated relationship with the concept, since it was largely still figuring itself out. The endgame area there is sort of Northern Thanalan, but it's also sort of Mordona. And I'm going to give it to Mordona because it has unique music and has a lot of the endgame amenities. This area, is frankly gorgeous. Like, ages ago, something happened to it. I haven't really read the lore that much, I'm sorry. And there was a sudden surge in ether covering the land in crystal. The music is haunting and grand and forlorn. It feels big and historic and a little sad, and it's just maybe one of the best parts of ARR. Heavensward is where the game's formula kind of started to really take shape, and it concludes in Oz's Law. At this point in time, you're chasing down King Thoradin and his knights as they've enlisted the help of the Asians to awaken ancient technology, where Ishgard has mostly been sweeping tundras and mystical lost woods and just the sheer visual majesty of the Churning Mists. I mean, God fucking yes! All of this ancient history gives way to a terrifying, alienating sky fortress. Ancient cybertech in a toxic-looking sky where there is little water, but instead poisoned streams, the land choked to death in service of this monstrous tech. The music overwhelms the contemplative strings that have been a mainstay in the soundscape of Heavensward with electric noise, a persistent beat, synthesized music making an eerie, unsettling final conclusion. Stormblood concludes in the Locks, where the city of Alamigo rests. The entire story has been about liberating Alamigo from the Garlean Empire, one of the two main antagonists in the overarching narrative, the other being the Asians, which is the group that Emet-Selch is a part of. Look, I'm explaining this horribly. You have fought long and hard, liberated an entire other country from the Empire's control, sacrificed many in this bloody but necessary revolution, and it concludes here, against the high walls of the great capital as you make the final push to free it from the Mad Prince Xenos. The music fits this perfectly. It feels like you're preparing to go to war. It harkens back to the central musical theme of Stormblood as a whole, tying everything back to where you started in this part of the story. It's beautiful and triumphant and a little tense. And then here we are, in The Tempest, where the story of Shadowbringers concludes. After being given a death sentence, you and your friends decide, with the last bit of your life, that you're gonna find Emet-Selch and rescue the Exarch. There is no plan to save you. Your companion Reen has been working to keep you from succumbing entirely to the light inside you, but it is only a matter of time before you give in. If we are playing along with this fiction, you, your friends, and the entire world are all on borrowed time, and all you can do is push forward. You all find a way to pursue Emmet into the water, down, deep, where even the overwhelming light, now something that is returned because of you, cannot penetrate, to this music. This moody, melancholic, kind of beautiful piece. This is the first time this theme has ever been played in the series. It happens here, not at the beginning of the expansion, not a running theme whenever Emet-Selch shows up to taunt and or help you. Here, at the end of your journey, when you're desperately grasping at anything to do with what little time you have left. And there is no uncanny music pushing you forward, no war theme, no sweeping epic sound, just this kind of beautiful and heart-wrenching theme. And then you travel deeper. Deeper still through coral bridges, down through some of the deepest parts of the first. And then you see it. This is Amarat, the city of the Asians. This is where all of these people who have been your enemies since the beginning of the game lived once, recreated from memory by Emet-Selch, not out of spite or malice or anger, but longing? Heartbreak? The music changes. Sweeping, gentle guitar gives way to plucked strings, pianos, and the ticking of a clock. This is Amarot, right before the end of the world. The catastrophe that split the source up into these different little worlds. Before that, Emmett and the others lived here in peace, wielding power unfathomable to what we can use now. Things like magic or even the Echo, just a mere fragment of what we were once. This city now lives here. No matter what happens to Emmett, to you, to the First, Amarot is alive and dead. Frozen, preserved in time to the sound of a perpetually ticking clock that will never reach its end. And you push on, deeper into this world of ancient Ashens who look upon you as a lost child, endearing and maybe even mildly concerned, but no one is hostile. Everyone is worried about what may come to pass tomorrow, but tomorrow never happens. And when you confront Emmett, finally, he takes you on one final journey, one final vision of his old home. And this is the last time this theme appears, until several patches later. At the end of the world. A world. What our world was once. The little details in this are stunning and devastating. Your party members, if you decided to go that direction, remarking on the horror of it all. The heartbreaking despair as the music wails and comes apart into strings, epic, but in that classical sense, tragic and grand and overwhelming. You move through broken streets, the sky raining fire, monsters feasting on the kind people you were talking to moments before, until you are taken up and above it all, looking down upon the world as it once was, the world as it begins to end before your very eyes. The game shows you the weather, by the way, like up there in the corner, and here, instead of clear skies or storms or everlasting light as per usual in this expansion, it simply predicts Terminus. Lovely. I don't know what this is doing here. I don't know why they did this, and it's incredibly frustrating, so much so that I've decided to spoil to you all some of the best things I've experienced in the video game world in 2019, because I don't know how to recommend this to people. The MMOs are already a pretty hefty investment, the cost of entry is high, and it works on a monthly subscription, and I'm worried that the impact of this beautiful story just doesn't hit as hard as it did for me, someone who's seen these characters, loved them, spent all of this time with them, watching them fight with you. Fight someone who is able to etch an entire city into the land permanently, because they have to believe that whatever form life takes now, no matter how small and broken and pathetic it may seem, it has to be meaningful. How do people recommend this? You are, in effect, recommending that people go through 4 entire stories to talk about just the last one. And like, if you're trying to recruit a friend to this conversation, and as opposed to getting folks to watch a long-running TV show or a series of books where the price of entry is pretty much one time, or like a Netflix subscription or something, FF14 is a daunting package deal. You kind of have to hope that the folks can stick through the really kind of naively sweet early game of ARR, get drawn in by the fashion, the side content, the crafting, something to hook them through the more tedious low points of the early story in order to have them experience what was, at least to me, kind of a genuinely profound experience. It obviously gave me a lot to reflect on, not just in the nature of how these kinds of games are thought about and constructed, but on what it means to truly reckon with a force greater than yourself, but that is still irrevocably human, so to speak. Anyway, it's now free to play all the way up to level 60, which includes the award-winning expansion Heavensward, and that's like over 100 hours of gameplay for free. That's 2 entire games right there in front of your computer. Special thanks to Brandon Haney, Kate Rose, Colleen T, DR Baker, Dector A, Evan Kearns, Lewis Wells, Maria Aladren, Alistair V, Narai the Redmarked, Pahor, Herr Bopper, and Thomas Vulpes.